Here comes Charlie Dean. Bowls to Jonathan. It's gone in the air. Should be a catch. It is! England have won. England win the ODI series. The women's Ashes is drawn. It is an extraordinary achievement. Yes, Australia will be lifting that trophy, but make no mistake, the celebrations will belong to England tonight, because Australia, they don't lose series. They barely lose games.
Shrubsole in now. Bowls for Bowser! 6 wickets for Anya Shrubsole, England's hero. England win the World Cup in front of a packed house at Lord's, who go nuts in the crowd. England in a huddle.
What a game. We've just found a way to get over the line in tight games, and so proud of those girls. They've really fought hard, and that's all I asked of them. And Anya Shrubsole, at the start of the tournament, she wasn't in rhythm, she wasn't bowling well, and for her to come to Lords and bowl like that and win us the game under huge pressure, yes, amazing.
It was an amazing time in 2017. And Heather has been an amazing leader for England over the last 9 years. And as she said in a statement, all good things must come to an end. And the writing was probably on the wall after the Ashes campaign in Australia. Obviously, the coach got the sack yesterday, and Heather's stepped down today. But an unbelievable leader, and someone that will, I guess, still help on a leadership front moving forward, even though she'll just be concentrating on herself.
Well, I suppose what the England women see is what the England men have done, and the sort of rejuvenation of Joe Root within the system of a team led by Ben Stokes.
Absolutely, and if you look at Heather now, she's actually playing the best she's played in a number of years. You know, she's dominating the game in all formats, and so hopefully with a little bit of pressure off her shoulders now. And you know, there's been questions over the last couple of years. Every time they get knocked out of a World Cup or they don't do well in an Ashes series, the question is, are you the right person for this team? And she's always said yes, and obviously now's the time that she can just concentrate on herself, and hopefully her game will go to another level.
Because of what happened in the Ashes, and because of John Lewis going, and also Kate Cross after the Ashes talked about maybe the culture not being quite right. If the culture isn't quite right, do you think it is correct that both head coach and captain go?
Absolutely. I think, as I said, I think the writing was on the wall. It's never an easy decision, and whoever's made those decisions at the top, it's taken a while. You know, the Ashes finished a long time ago, so they've had a review, they've had all those meetings. But yeah, I absolutely think it's the right decision, and it's time for a fresh start for this England team.
Do you have a concern that in the T20 she went off injured? England kind of fell apart without her. And then there was this huge discussion about, well, if Heather Knight isn't there, where is their on-field leadership coming from? So is that a concern for you?
Yeah, and absolutely. I think that for me has been one of the biggest downfalls over the last 5 or 6 years, that there isn't a standout candidate that is going to take over the captaincy. When you can lose games to Australia, they're the best team in the world. They're so good at cricket. But when you look at Australia, they've probably got 5, 6, 7 people that could take over the captaincy. When you look at England, you're going, oh, we could give it her. She could have a go at it. You know, there isn't a standout person now that goes, right, they're the next England captain.
What kind of person do you want to see? What and also, often when we ask this as well, it depends on what their role is within the side, because you don't want to overburden someone, do you?
Absolutely not. I think, in all honesty, they need a really strong coach moving forward. So they need somebody that can get that culture right. They can control the group and sort out the problems within the dressing room. And a captain can then come in and obviously have strong opinions and work alongside the coach, but also a fresh person, a young person for me, somebody like Charlie Dean, to throw a name in the hat. I think she'd be an exceptional leader who will play cricket for England for a number of years.
So, you talk about the head coach there. John Lewis lost his job during the week. There, we are told there is an outstanding candidate in Charlotte Edwards, who was the previous captain before Heather Knight.
Yeah, there's not really any more names being thrown in the hat for that one, is there? So, Charlotte Edwards has been talked about a lot, and I know it's something that she's put down in the past before John Lewis took over. She was like, no, now's not the right time. She's basically come out and said, pick me, I'm available, I'm ready for when you want me. So if the ECB decide to go down that route, I think she'd be a brilliant head coach, because she doesn't take any nonsense. She'll really get hold of this team, and she'll know how to, I guess, make the standards better so they can compete under pressure. And that's what she did so well for such a long period of her career, was coping under pressure. And that's ultimately where this England team have failed over the last couple of years.
Her coaching record is outstanding and global as well.
Yeah, she's just won the WPL again for the second time in 3 years. She's a freak of a coach. I don't know what it is. I've never been coached by her, but everybody that has says she's absolutely outstanding. She gives you free rein to work things out by yourself, to have that responsibility, but she also doesn't take any nonsense alongside it. And I think that's what England need right now.
Just to throw one other question in there then. So the ECB managing director is Claire Connor, and Connor was Edwards' predecessor as captain. So on the one hand, it's sort of coming full circle, and this is not, we've already said what a great coaching career Charlotte Edwards has had already, but sort of Connor, Edwards and Knight have been the three dominant figures for, well, how many years? 20 more?
Yeah, a very long time, and I think that
is that a good thing?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, because they've all obviously gone into different roles, but when we're looking now at who's going to take over from Heather Knight, there's a lack of leaders within that group. So these three women that are now, have been in and around the ECB for 20 years, they're three standout leaders. We need more leaders moving forward so that we can widen that pool of women in the game.
Alex Hartley there, talking to Mark Chapman on Saturday. I'm alongside former England batter Lydia Greenway. Lydia, was it inevitable that John Lewis and Heather Knight were going to be held accountable for such a disastrous winter?
Yeah, I think it was, to be honest. I think the coach more so. I think obviously John Lewis came in, I think November 2022. And as you say, he actually started pretty well. The Ashes series that was at home in 2023, it was a draw in the end. It was 8-all, and England played some really good cricket. But since that series, I think they were lulled into a false sense of security, because in the women's game, that when there's lots of bilateral series, a team like England should always win or always beat the opposition that they're playing against, with all due respect to those teams. So their only real opportunity to see where they're at as a team is when they come up against Australia, because that's the team they should be measuring themselves against. And unfortunately, since that home Ashes series where it was 8-all, they just sort of couldn't find a way to perform in the big moments. Obviously, they bowed out in the group stages of the most recent T20 World Cup, and this Ashes series was, for me personally, to watch that. It was really hard to watch and so disappointing.
There was a lot of talk about culture and team culture, and I suppose the coach is very important in setting that tone. So is the captain as well, you would say. But before we move on to Heather Knight, what was the sort of style of John Lewis's coaching?
I think, so in the women's game, we've had a number of different coaches who have come in and they've had very different styles. And I think in the past, it's sometimes been a little bit too instructional. The sort of ropes have been quite tight in terms of what players can and can't do. And I think at times players have felt quite suppressed with that. And so John Lewis then comes in and he's been the opposite. He's given the players a lot of slack in terms of what they can and can't do on and off the pitch. And I think that has potentially, with all the intentions that he had, which were the best intentions, I've spoken to him and he's a really good guy. He really has loved being involved in the women's game. I'm sure he wants to continue being involved, but I just wonder whether he will reflect on that and think, okay, did I get that quite right? Did I set the standards that were needed? Did I challenge the players enough? Did I make sure that they were held accountable to their performances? And I think what we've seen is that they haven't. I think we've seen a lack of accountability. I think we've seen the standards drop, which is a real shame. And I think this whole sort of last couple of years will be a big learning experience for everyone involved.
Often when you get a sort of seismic moment like this, people look to have a completely opposite type of coach. I mean, Andy Flower being replaced by a completely different kind of coach in the men's game, for example. Who do you think? I mean, there's obviously one very, very obvious candidate, somebody that you've worked with. Let's just say it out loud. Charlotte Edwards. Do you, A, think she's up for it? And B, do you think her style will be sufficiently different from the Lewis style?
Yeah, I think I feel that I haven't actually spoken to her, but I feel this is the perfect time for Charlotte Edwards to come into this role. I think when the role was initially up, I think she probably would have liked to have a little bit more experience in that head coach role. And since then, she's had 2 years, obviously, with the Mumbai Indians. She's had more time with the Sydney Sixers, obviously here in England. She's been with Hampshire and Southern Brave. So this is a perfect time for Charlotte Edwards to come in. And I think in terms of her style, I think she's the hybrid. I think she's the best of both. Having obviously played with her throughout the majority of my career and worked with her as a coach, she's got the perfect balance of making sure the players are accountable for what they're doing on and off the pitch, but also bringing in a bit of fun, understanding that players can't be robots all the time, and recognising moments when, okay, guys, you can go and have a bit of fun now. So I might be biased, but I think she's the only name that England should be looking at. Yes, they will have to go through the process, I'm sure, whether someone like Matthew Mott might put their name into the hat, or the other John Lewis, who is currently with the England A team at the moment out in Australia. They might be two other candidates, but if I'm the ECB, I don't think they should be looking any further.
You did say that you've worked with Charlotte Edwards before, which you have. Could you be tempted to do it again?
As in a coaching role, do you mean?
Yeah.
I always love working with Charlotte Edwards, and like her, I'm just passionate about what this England team does. So yeah, I don't know, but I would love to see her do the role.
Now, if she does take over, and a lot of people think that she will, she's going to have to firstly appoint a new captain, because there's no Heather Knight. Now, Heather Knight has been captain for best part of 9 years, came in, replaced Charlotte Edwards in 2016, again after a sort of similar thing, a failure in a T20 World Cup quarter semi-final when England failed to chase and it just looked slightly off the pace, and Charlotte Edwards herself had been in the role for a very long time. Before that, it had been Claire Connor. There had been 3 captains of England in the last 25 years. Although Heather Knight has obviously sort of taken the fall for what's happened in the Ashes, we've got to look beyond that Ashes, haven't we, and look at her legacy over the last 9 years.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Dan, because I think sometimes people just remember the last thing that you do as a player, and actually Heather Knight is so much better than what has happened in the last 12 months or so. I think we have to remember how she led the side to that 2017 World Cup win, the runs that she has scored in the middle order for England. She has on so many occasions, she has got England out of tricky problems along with Nat Sciver-Brunt. And she's been a stalwart. I think she's been calm, she's been resilient. She sets the standards off the pitch. I think when I was playing with her, she was always one of the best at fitness testing, and she probably wasn't the most naturally gifted in terms of that athleticism. Hopefully she won't mind me saying that, but she was always the one who worked the hardest. And I think as a captain, if you've got someone like that setting the standard, then it only wants you to push yourself as well.
Now, we're assured that she wants to continue playing, much as Joe Root has continued playing after being England men's captain for quite a long time. How difficult will that be for her? Because she's been the supremo. She's not just been captain. I mean, she's been more than a captain for those 9 years. How do you go back into the ranks?
I don't know, Dan. I think that is a really hard thing to do, particularly given that she did it for so long. And I also think it will be interesting dynamic for the captain coming in as to how they will feel about it. If it is someone like Nat Sciver-Brunt, I think that will be a fine dynamic, because they've obviously played with each other for a long, long time. And I think they have a good understanding of how each other work. But I think for Heather personally, I think she would just have to get her head around about, okay, how much input can I have as a person who's just in the team as a player rather than the captain? So, yeah, that will be a tricky one to navigate. I
mean, it's something of an indictment of English women's cricket, though, that it's not obvious who would be that replacement. Now, Nat Sciver-Brunt is the vice-captain, but of course she was on the field when everything fell apart in that T20 group game against the West Indies. She's not always looked like the most natural captain, and you'd sort of imagine that they might want to bring, a fresh face. Could it be somebody really outside the setup, someone like, Holly Armitage, or dare I say, Grace Scrivens? Or is it going to be somebody, who's already there?
Yeah, I mean, the other name is Charlie Dean. My opinion is if they're not good enough to be playing in the England 11, then you can't bring in a specialist captain. But if they are, that's absolutely fine. The other name is Charlie Dean. She plays all formats. So, time will tell.
Thanks to Lydia Greenway for joining us. Stay with us. We'll continue talking about the future of the England women's team shortly.
The TMS Podcast from BBC Radio 5 Live.
So I'm pleased to say that BBC sport journalist Fionn Wynne joins me now. Fionn, we were just talking with Lydia there about John Lewis's successor. Who would your pick be?
Yeah, Charlotte Edwards does seem like the obvious contender, as Lydia was saying there. She spoke quite openly last time the vacancy came up in 2022 about just wanting a little bit more experience. And she certainly has achieved that and a massive amount of success with that experience as well. She's won the 100. She's won 5 domestic titles with Southern Vipers. She's won 2 WPL titles now with Mumbai Indians. So, not only is she got more experience, but she knows how to win. And she had that knack as a player and as a captain as well. And when we think of the transition that England are in, with a new captain and a new coach needing to kind of rebrand themselves, trying to rebuild with some youth coming in, alongside blending the experience of Heather Knight back into the ranks, it does seem like there is nobody better in terms of the CV that she's got, and she knows the international game so well. It does feel like it's a no-brainer for the ECB from here.
Well, I tend to agree with you entirely, but some people will say, she's going to be a bit too close in a way to Heather Knight, because she was indeed Heather's captain towards the back end of her own career. We're talking with Lydia just now about how captains have been in post for so long that Charlotte was actually captaining England when Nat Silverbrunt was playing as well. So is that in any way awkward, or is that actually a positive?
I think it could be a positive. And I also think we need to remember that this is a really this is brand new territory for England. They've had 3 permanent captains since the start of 2000. So this is something that we're really not used to. This doesn't happen. So it does feel inevitable because of how long Charlotte Edwards was captain for, because of how long Heather Knight was captain for, that there probably was always going to be a little bit of that overlap and that kind of conflict. But I think, with the women's game now, these coaches and these players work together so often around the world in franchise cricket, in domestic cricket. And I think, the likes of Heather Knight and let's say Nat Silverbrunt, if she is the next captain, they are experienced enough to kind of deal with those, potential tensions, those emotions. And, Heather Knight has said herself as well, she's very keen to get back into the batting ranks and enjoy that side of her game again. So, I think it is something that they should be able to manage pretty well. And as Alex and Lydia have said, Charlotte Edwards she's a tough coach. She's a disciplined coach, but she's also aware of the balance of the work-life balance that players need too.
Now, you were out in the Women's Ashes out in Australia, so you're really well positioned to say what you think were the failings of that England side. Now, the obvious ones from us watching on back in England were, they dropped too many catches, they failed to chase down a modest target. But was there something else at play? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about culture and attitude, and those are going to be the challenges that Charlotte Edwards faces. Did you sort of see that as a bit of a problem while you were out there in Australia?
Yeah, I think that picked up, and that sort of thing is highlighted, the more you lose, and England just got into this terrible rut of losing. They were losing from winning positions. They were then getting completely outplayed, and everything was spiraling and the wheels were coming off on the field. And when that happens, naturally people back home, people in the media will focus on the off-field stuff and the perceptions and how the team is coming across. And it did kickstart with the Sophie Ecclestone's refusal of the interview with Alex Hartley after the first T20 in Sydney, I think it was. And it gave the impression of this culture of complacency, a culture that enabled one of their best players to act in that way, to refuse a media duty. And with very little consequence, let's be honest, because as much as Claire Connor admitted it was unfortunate and shouldn't happen again, there wasn't much consequence for Sophie Ecclestone. She played every other game on the tour. And I think, Australia's culture, for example, I know we're always comparing with Australia, it just would not allow that to happen. And that is something that, if it is Charlotte Edwards, if it's someone else, is going to have to address is, the perception of complacency, the perception of coziness, and having competition for places from within the domestic game will help with that as well, because, you don't want players feeling like their place in the team is guaranteed. And perhaps some of these changes, the coach and the captain moving aside will, make some players wake up and think, okay, not everything is secure, not everything is cozy. And it's going to take some time, and it's probably going to take England winning something meaningful, like an Ashes, like a World Cup, for them to fully win the fans back around. Because Kate Cross admitted herself, they did lose some fans during that tour with how they came across, and saying that they were really close to Australia all the time. And we were kind of thinking, well, which games are you watching? Because it certainly doesn't look that close to us. So yeah, the messaging, the external messaging will certainly need to change. And I think those relations with the fans and with the press as well is going to be another, a big tick in that in tray for the new coach.
Well, they've got some tough games coming up. They've got India at home, and they've got a World Cup coming up in India. And we saw that they had real trouble playing against spin, notably Alana King, but also the likes of Ash Gardner and the other spin options that Australia had. So they're going to be thrown in the deep end pretty quickly. We need to look at the issue of captain and who can be captain, because it is, as you pointed out, such a rare moment, when you actually get a new England women's captain. Now, I want to start first by just saying, do you envisage that the captain has to be the captain for all three formats?
It's a difficult one. It feels like, it's different to men's cricket, isn't it, when you consider how rarely women play Test cricket. So that almost has to kind of go on the back burner a little bit, I think, because England don't play a Test match this home summer. So they've kind of got to park that for now and focus on the white ball formats, because, as you said, that 50 over World Cup is coming at the end of the summer, and that's got to be the focus. Obviously, the white ball series in the summer as well will be building towards that, and the new captain will be moulding their team during that. I think, yes, they realistically have to play both white ball formats, because so much of England's cricket is, played in that, and they'll need that consistency. But then that brings in a difficulty if you consider some senior players, the likes of Kate Cross and Tammy Beaumont, who have got captaincy experience in domestic cricket, which is something that the team is really lacking. They don't play both formats. So, you could possibly have, let's say, Tammy Beaumont as a one-day captain and Natsu Abront as a T20 captain. But I think, given the fragility of England's situation at the moment and the fact that they're going to need to build consistency, I think they would like it to be, a multi-format captain.
Well, and if it is a multi-format captain, and given the longevity of previous England captains, they tend to start in the captaincy relatively young. You look at how old Heather Knight was when she began, and indeed Charlotte Edwards. So I just wonder if they'll be wary of a continuity captain like Nat Sciver-Brunt. Nat Sciver-Brunt's most high-profile moment as a captain recently was taking over when Heather Knight got injured, and it didn't go awfully well at all, did it? In that match against the West Indies, she doesn't seem necessarily like a sort of natural candidate to be captain. She's got a lot on her plate. She plays an awful lot of cricket generally. Do you see a case for, say, somebody who's established within the side but is young and starting out their career? I'm thinking about somebody like Charlie Dean, for example, who could take this role on and then grow into it. Or do you see a sort of more an interim solution like a Nat Sciver-Brunt, who probably wouldn't be captain for anything like the length of time that Heather has been?
Yeah, it's a tricky one with Nat Sciver-Brunt, because England will definitely need to be wary of her workload, bearing in mind, she carries the batting lineup. She's one of the most experienced bowlers. She's also about to become a mum for the first time, so she's going to have, a lot going on off the field as well. And when she captained England previously, I think it was the Commonwealth Games, another instance where they struggled without Heather Knight. She had to take a break from the game after it, which is nothing to be held against her whatsoever. It's just something that England will need to be wary of in terms of adding more responsibility to her plate. She may feel like, having had that break and having had that experience now, she knows what it's expected of her. She knows what it takes, and that she can take that challenge on. And when we spoke to her in Australia about the subject, this was before Heather Knight had obviously been removed from her job, she did say that she was keen to take on the position if it was available. So one option is, yes, give it to Nat Sciver-Brunt for a year, get through the World Cup, get, some younger players maybe getting experience in captaincy and domestic cricket and building up somebody like Charlie Dean. But the problem with that is then in 2026, and this is where the schedule becomes so manic, England are hosting the T20 World Cup, and that is going to be a huge moment for the ECB in terms of having an ICC event on home soil again. Following up from 2017 where they had that momentous victory at Lord's. So if you were going to give it to Charlie Dean just before that, that would be an enormous amount of pressure on her. Or they could throw her in now with the support of Heather Knight and with the support of Nat Sciver-Brunt behind her through perhaps a little bit of a quieter summer and then the World Cup in India, and build through it that way. So there are options. But I think, this is a problem that England have made because they have had 9 years to plan for the future. And all of a sudden they find themselves in a position where they're thinking, oh, gosh, what are the answers? And that lack of succession is coming back to haunt them now. And it's, as I said, looking at the schedule, it's a really tricky time for that to be happening.
And you don't imagine that there'll be any kind of Hail Mary. I've been looking on social media, I've seen on Blue Sky and X, people going, oh, how about Holly Armitage, who's skipper up at Durham and is very well thought of as a fine cricketing brain, or even the even bigger Hail Mary of former England under-19 skipper Grace Scrivens. You don't see anybody from outside the squad coming in sort of doing a Mike Brearley type role.
I can't particularly see it. No, Georgia Adams is another one in domestic cricket who is a brilliant captain. And, those three named are brilliant captains and brilliant players in their own right. But I don't think England are in a position where they can bring in somebody to play as a captain, like a specialist captain. Of course, they can all contribute with the bat. But Grace Scrivens, she hasn't even been capped by England yet. So she, probably needs a little bit more time to grow and develop into her own game and to learn her game in domestic cricket. But I can't see a situation where an outsider comes in. No, I think it'll, Nat Sciver-Brunt is the likely candidate, having been Heather Knight's deputy for so long. And then, the outside choice you would probably say would be Charlie Dean, who has been, touted as a future England captain for the past few years of her career, really.
We've got a restructuring of the women's game, domestic game, tier 1 counties making their bow this year. Is it going to be the case, and please tell me it is, that England internationals are going to be expected to turn out where possible for their counties? Because it seems to me that this is a really good opportunity to show whether this new system is going to work, and really to develop the talent in the domestic scene that's going to create the competition for places that I know you've been talking about a lot of people have been as well, that what England doesn't have, that Australia does have, is that competition for places. And it's sort of got to happen at domestic level, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to the point around the likes of Holly Armitage and Georgia Adams, who have been in the domestic game for so long and scored so many runs, they know their game, they are so experienced, but England have been very reluctant over the years actually to pick players from the domestic pathway. They've picked mostly young players based on potential. Let's think of somebody like Amaya Bouchier. Her first century came in international cricket. She hadn't scored a century in domestic cricket. Compare that to somebody like Georgia Voll, who's just come into the Australia team, who is established in the domestic setup, has a huge amount of runs in state cricket and in the WBBL behind her. And lo and behold, she seems to find international cricket really, really easy. So I think, and the way for England, if they don't trust their domestic system, if they don't think that is equipping their players for international cricket enough, well, their international players need to play it when they can, because that will drive up the standards, that will drive up the competition. England recalled Sophia Dunkley after scoring loads of runs in domestic cricket at the beginning of last season. And so it does show that, you can do it, and it can be done, and it can be trusted. Because Sophia Dunkley also then made a big impact on the Ashes series when she did come in, scored some important runs when England were, in really tricky situations. So yeah, I do think that they need to play, and they've got time as well. England's first match of this international summer isn't until the 21st of May. So there are no excuses really for them to be going into this international summer undercooked. They don't play much 50 over cricket. We saw how they really, really struggled in those ODIs against Australia at the beginning of the year. So it's a perfect opportunity for some of the younger players to find their feet in that format and learn how the tempo of that format works a little bit better with the World Cup coming up at the end of the summer. So yeah, that should definitely now be trusted, and it should absolutely be the platform from which England kick on, and they can finally start to make inroads and start to compete with the setup that Australia have got.
Well, undeniably challenging times, but challenging times are often very, very interesting times.